Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman, and this is War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey, hello. Right, with Alexey Arestovich and with a magical echo. Right? Indeed, that's we have some issues in the studio. I'm just forewarning those people that will start commenting that in troves in the chat saying that something is wrong with the stream. We are aware sometimes things fall apart. Yeah, sometimes Feldman camp is not in order. All right. First thing I want to discuss, Alexei, is the beginning of mobilization in Russian Federation. Putin signed an order, a decree, to increase the numbers of Russian troops by 180,000. And this is the biggest increase of Russian military since the beginning of this war. And after that, initially there was a slight uptick in increase of numbers. Then they announced the mobilization without firm goals. And now they're announcing the firm increase. All right, so first it is happening as a part of reorganization of Moscow and Leningrad or St. Petersburg districts. And they are going to elevate some of the brigades to division level and create a couple new armies. This is the standard process they're doing, but unfortunately this is what we are not doing in Ukraine. Now, this is the first official increase, because before there were other increases too. People who were already serving in the army under in different capacities were promoted or transferred. So now it is just affirmed. The logic is obvious. He is trying to increase the group fighting in Ukraine overall to 1 million personnel. And in his opinion, this is the number that Russian economy and mobilization system can sustain. There are two conclusions one can make out of this event. He is going to increase numbers roughly to about that number by the middle of 25. That's one way of going there, just by getting contractors to the front. The other fork is to indeed conduct a mobilization proper. This order, this decree that he signed creates conditions for this mobilization, but it is not a mobilization itself. So that is what is important to understand. All right, this all seems like a serious step on the backdrop of negotiations that are seemingly happening in the background. And I paid attention, and you did too, that Blinken and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Britain were present together in Kiev, and Minister of Foreign Affairs of China was visiting Moscow. After that, there was an exchange of prisoners of war. 38 Azov fighters were returned to Ukraine. This is a big step. And it seems like this is an event happening behind the curtains. Both sides are doing certain concessions on the way to talk, to discussions. Right. The exchange was a notable event. It was the first one during quite a few months. And this was definitely a gesture of goodwill. In parallel to that, there is a scary picture being propagated on both sides. Sides talking about nuclear arms. Today, Spiegel published in Germany that Putin flew to Mongolia to get some blessing from shamans in there to use some of the nukes possibly. And we know that the powers in the world keep status quo via creating a certain visage, an image, something that forms public opinion in a certain direction. We on this stream trying to show the reality, unlike these propaganda pictures. The reality is that they are in the discussion process, full steam. And as you noticed, the head of Foreign Affairs for Britain and the head of American Foreign Affairs was visiting Kyiv together to state the coordinated, concerted position. And since Chinese representative was in Moscow at that time, that means that they do have some connectivity on this with these positions. You know, I've been, as always, talking to taxi drivers in different places, how we call it. And while you cannot trust that information fully, many of them are stating that Moscow is actually being rather flexible. They are usually pretty flexible in negotiations. And despite what we hear in Ukraine, that Russians are cunning, they never fulfill their promises. And we keep outlining that they just react to the force and violence. Well, that's why we should be inviting them to the peace formula, right? In November. So the meaning of this story is that short message that was sent to Ukraine is, we have no money to fight your war in 25 from allies. However you do, strike truce, we have money to rebuild Ukraine, but these are private monies and government has no influence about using this money in Ukraine. And the way for Ukraine to acquire this money, to access them for rebuilding, is to cease the hostilities on the front. The other side, Moscow is quite ready to move forward with Kherson and Zaporozhye, but of course in exchange for Donetsk and Lugansk and full district exchange, or by the front line. One way or another, they'll be ready to use Istanbul agreements as the basis. Those were thought out pretty well, and there is nothing new that can be devised different from already existing formula, and one way or another they will be realized. The question remains whether Putin and Zelensky would like to sign documents together, because both of them accuse the other side of all villainy and everything possible, but at least perhaps they can sign a ceasefire. There are some obstacles on the way to that as well. For example, disappointment of some part of the volunteers fighting on the front, perhaps disappointment of certain parts of Ukrainian society who do not want to cease this, to stop fighting without kicking Russians out of Ukrainian territory. Military, looking at how they organize on the front line, I don't think they're a serious threat or a coup threat to Zelensky. There could be some local disobedience, but for every brave military officer, and there were a lot of statements like that, that we will never allow Russians to continue occupying our land. They can, of course, outline 8 deserters who do not want to fight, and those would be ready to leave the front or leave the military if they can. So this is definitely a contributing factor to the political life internally. The story about how the West prevented Ukraine from winning the war. This story is obviously being concocted right now, because if you look at all the statements, the plan of victory that has worked out deep strikes into the territory of Russia, that has been recently leaked or published, and later, of course, we'll discover that the West did not deliver enough arms, and that's why we could not kill this world evil in the face of Vladimir Putin and his satellites. So both sides, and I'm kind of curious to see how Russia will tell the story of this peace, but I suspect they'll say that the first part of operation was concluded, and Lugansk, Donetsk regions are becoming part of Russia now, and then they probably will say that together with the West and China, they figured a way to settle Ukraine and to get Nazis out of Ukraine, so Ukraine would become a reasonable neighbor. And from the Ukrainian side, we will be eating the picture from Zelensky government that the West prevented us from winning this war. But that's exactly what media preparations allude to is going to happen. Dear viewers. So let's clarify a couple of things here, Alexey. First of them is publication in Wall Street Journal about larger number of Ukrainians who want to negotiate, but military and those who serve in the army, they are categorically against it. This is one of the headlines in Wall Street Journal. According to recent polling, only 18% of veterans and army servicemen concur that Ukraine should go and follow the path of negotiations, which is the lowest number among all the demographic groups participated in the research in the poll. Only 15% of them, however, said that they would join the protest if Kiev would have signed some peace treaties. So the quote is somewhat scary, looking frightening, but on the other hand, I have not seen these polls. I don't know where they have conducted them, and it's difficult to even imagine how can you conduct such a polling in Ukraine. In your view, that quote, do you think it's an attempt to manipulate? Right? A social polling among the military. I'm just enjoying that statement. How are they being polled? Are they being called right there in the trenches? Or there's some pollster coming to the command outpost and saying, can I ask you a question? That's a social questions. Do you believe in our victory? Do you believe in Zelensky? Do you believe in peace accord? I think that Wall Street Journal, as any respectable Western media, are just people. And they sometimes are vulnerable to manipulations, to deceit, to money. And I think this publication is probably a move on the chessboard by that part of Ukraine which is orchestrating now the message that we did not want to sign any peace agreement. We wanted to fight to the end. Our position was relentless. We suggested the plan to get to victory because we are in solidarity with our troops, and then damn West just didn't give us enough arms and prohibited us from attacking Russia in perpetuity. So we only have one option left, to strike peace. And when all those military who participated in this polling would bring up why the heck did you sign peace accords, the administration would be able to answer and say that, look, we tried, we did our best, the West just cut our opportunities. Look, Alexey, Wall Street Journal is also publishing a quote from Vadim Beletsky, the commander of the 3rd Storm Brigade, who is saying that even though we are accumulating some tiredness from war and some dread, there is nothing serious that we're facing. We still have enough resources that we can take back a big part of our territory back from Russians. So do you think he is correct in his statement? Well, Nikolai, it's like asking the Vikings during the battle whether they still intend on defeating the enemy. These guys, they do like to fight. They think, and that's a regular statement from this group, if the country gathers together and solves a few tasks like preparation of troops, providing logistics, and proper use, then we can definitely kick Russians back. And perhaps we can, but who in the last 2.5 years was failing to implement all these changes? If we were failing during those years of war, how come we're ready to do it now? Do you really believe they will be doing it now in the administration? And we've talked about that before, and it seems like we need to repeat it once again. If the country for 33 years was deindustrializing itself, so was destroying, in the first order, a military-industrial complex, and you should understand it, it is not capable to not only win the war with Russia, it cannot even by itself not lose this war and not crash and burn. Deindustrialization did not come as a surprise. It was a conscious politics that was conducted by the elites of Ukraine, because the model that they were following, listening to the economists, and their dreams were about being an agrarian country with a strong IT sector and some of the old industries, steel, pipes, and some other things that we produce. This model became absolutely bankrupt over the years in the face of Russian aggression specifically. For 33 years, we've been destroying our military complex, and this was our internal politics. In order to correct this situation, even if we imagine Lee Kuan Yew as a president here, and the whole society is supportive of him, and there's nobody objecting. There's no class or economic infighting. Everybody returned back, all those who left. We get all the immigrants back. Everybody roll up their sleeves and are working for 12 hours a day in front of their work positions. We would need at least 15 years, at least half of the time that we've been dismantling everything. So 16.5 years likely we'll need to restore us to previous capacity. And that's in peace times, when we have electricity and when missiles are not falling on our heads. Now, this is not happening. Energy system is in tatters. How long will it take military to fix everything? Probably full 33 years. Because we're talking not about just rebuilding military complex, but also rebuilding social parts of the system of the society. And that includes all those layers of society who were profiteering from the current system, our elites and our people who are getting a lot of social support. We were a very socialist state who've been donating a lot of money to different layers, different groups. And there was a mutual agreement that those below allowed the ones above to steal so that they could also corrupt and behave however they like down at the bottom. So that's why I'm not really in agreement with Andrei Beletsky's position, because we cannot win this war even if we had Napoleon fighting this war on our side. Because Napoleon at best will be able to use our forces more or less correctly, but he'll not be able to rebuild military-industrial complex by magic in a year and reconstruct the country on a quickie. So that's the conclusion number one. Conclusion number 2, we can live only with aid of our partners, and they have a very specific position about this war. It is well known, but we'll repeat it once again. Putin should not win, Ukraine should not lose. They're trading with Russia, including China, about situation in the Africa, in the Middle East, and other parts of the world. Russia is rebuilding its economy. This is Belousov program. They also went down the material superpower pathway after the USSR collapse, and they got trapped there. We also were a material provider for the world. Some of the resources, forest, and agricultural product, and they're the oil and gas providers for the world. So according to the economist data who are tracking the situation, for example, Alexey, whom I would recommend to our audience, dependency on Russian oil went from 25% in the world down to 5%. Russia ceases to be the country that is in a material trap, material provider trap, minerals and resources trap. They're changing what they're making. This is not high level of production that they're doing now. It's not iPhones and computers and chips, but they're adding additional processing capabilities, and they're changing what they're providing to the world. Right now, not much, but they're on the way to get there. Now, on our side, we have not done anything about it. We have not done 1, 2, and 3 steps that we outlined are important, and we want to, kick them out and even get to their territory and win over them? Russia, again, I would put that in bold. According to American and Britain plans, they cannot be destroyed in this century, because their main goal is to pull them on their side in their fight with China, or to make sure that they're neutral at least. So there would not be another Mongol empire, and Russia with China, like a land-based monster, would become a huge, colossal problem for the West. The rising Asia, the rising Southeast, against the naval countries, however you formulate it. But the problem remains that the West is in somewhat decline and Asia is on the rise. This is a huge monster that would be very difficult to deal with for the West and collective West. Putin does not want to become part of that monster. He has his own path that he is intriguing about. And I'm telling you here that during the 10 or 15 years, or maybe even faster, there might be a situation when the West will be praising Russia as its best ally and maybe aid. If Putin takes the right position during possible conflict of the West with China, and they might be even talking about the glory of Russian and American or British arms against the Asia. So that's a possibility that's there in the fold. Where will Ukraine be? Are we going to be allies of this group? What if one day we find ourselves next to Putin and his troops and his regime on the front against some Asian adversary? Are we going to maintain position saying that our troops will never be on the same line as Russian troops? At least put some Canadians between us while we're fighting, I don't know, imaginary China or some other potential conflict together. So here one needs to understand clearly that our wants is one thing, and the pictures being drawn to us by Ukrainian propaganda is something else. Real picture is really something different. There is no plan to defeat Russia, to destroy it completely. The West wants to leave Russia strong enough so it would present a problem for China, but not strong enough to present a problem for the West if they decide to jump and join China. But Putin is not going to join China. They want to remain independent, perhaps weaker than China, understandably, but still remaining somewhat of a significant player. Then China is also in a system of very specific dependency on Russia. Northern Sea route, some mineral resources and fertilizers. So Putin has certain levers against China. They're weaker, they're not as strong as Chinese, but on some parameters they are very key levers. So I would remind once again, there is an interesting country called Botswana, for which Turkey, China, the West and Russia were competing. Access to lithium ore is now secured exclusively by Russian Federation. While there were a ton of conversations about China having purchased the whole Africa or that Americans still maintain influence, well, here you go. Russian strategy in Africa is not as primitive as it was portrayed to be. As very often they're drumming it up as just support of some dictators. But no, they actually are going for certain things. And recently they acquired access to lithium. Even China, with all their money and influence, failed to do that. So it's not so simple. Then Turkish endeavor with BRICS is also a possible factor to change a lot of things. Today in Astana there was signed an agreement, a customs agreement about lowering customs barriers between the Turkish-speaking countries, Turkish part of the world, and it's pretty big. So this is another part of the world that's also forming itself. And there are a lot of big geopolitical emotions happening in the world at large. So in that view, there is no vision where Russia is planned to be utterly defeated. In such a view, you don't know, you never know if you want to really destroy the country, because if you do, perhaps you will regret that later, and you might need this ally to help you at some other point, and without them you will fail. Byzantium went through this at some point. They rebuilt themselves on the image of the Roman Empire, which usually would send a legion to destroy the enemy and just crush them to shambles so that nobody remains. So they've changed the organization of their troops and politics completely. There's a good book by Luttwak, Strategy of Byzantium Empire. It's difficult to read, but I want to say that if you take an essence of it, they rebuilt their diplomacy, their military organization, so that they would never have to destroy their enemies completely, because the situation on the borders were so difficult and complex. There were different sides they were fighting with, and your today's enemy very often became your best ally tomorrow. And that's why exactly we're repeating a similar situation now in the world. It's up to us, how do we divide, what do we take out of the negotiations, but our attempts to say that we'll destroy Russia can only cause a shy smile from our allies. That's why peace negotiations, we are still dancing on the propaganda front. We're still very active on Ukraine, and I think that's what we're going to send a message, that we will and would have reached Vladivostok in Russia and would have utterly defeated, but our neighbors precluded us from getting to these goals. This is a situational story. It might work during the peace accord time and maybe a little bit further, but after that there is some strategy that we need to start implementing. So do we have that strategy? Are we going to change our country, or at least look at our main rival, Russia, and do something similar, rebuild our economy, switch from being a material and agricultural country to having more investments and more capabilities in the industrial sphere? Because since 1960s, there's some interesting data that countries with a higher level of secondary and tertiary refinement of minerals, they're always more successful than countries with a lower level of refineries of the minerals. So we are not economists here, we're not talking about economic sides, but I understand that higher level of economic development, more complex level of economic relations in the society, better motivation, better economic capabilities, better military complex, better military. It's a long upward curve that you can put yourself in if you go this way. But this is not a simple path. This is a change of social setup of the country and change of the social agreement within Ukraine. Second, are we going to do anything about demography? Right, that would have been very interesting to hear from you. What can we do with demography? Because numbers are pretty sad. Right, we can find ways to bring majority of Ukrainians back, if not all of them. But we are currently, again, this is not confirmed, but some people are saying out in Europe that they have hundreds of thousands of petitions to cancel Ukrainian citizenship and take the local citizenship of where our refugees are. And looking at this, we see a very interesting picture, that if Russian Federation, having frozen war at this stage, having struck an agreement with the West, and having sold their neutrality with China as expensive as possible, will figure out how to get rid of part of the sanctions, will continue rebuilding their economy in the way they want to, and will continue increasing their military, and you just saw Putin's writing a decree, then in about 4 years, we may find ourselves in a situation much worse than February 15th of 22, in a much less prepared country to the next stage of war. And here one can ask a question if we need this stage. It is not known, because during this time, global situation in the triangle of the West, Russia, and China and India, things may change. right? So perhaps everything will change so much that Russia would have no interest in attacking Ukraine. But my prognostication is so that if Russia would decide or would think that they need to attack Ukraine, with a 90% probability they will come. They are more ready than in February of 22, and we will be prepared much worse than we were in February of 22. Even our analysts and our military who are against striking peace accord right now, they're saying that, look, if we strike peace accords now, we'll probably still be infighting for the next 5 years and not figuring things out. 5 years later, Russia will be in a better place, continuing on their course, and we won't even get a chance to rebuild the country. Fighting this war, we still at least doing something, but if we don't change the system, we cannot put ourselves in a better place. And at the same time, while fighting this war, we cannot change the country. There is no electricity, missiles are falling on us, we cannot really start rebuilding anything. So of course, we can find certain ways how to do things even in the war times, but again, they're doable even in peace times too. And attempts to transfer the key system of the country, like energy systems, for example, it does require peaceful skies over your head. And without a peace accord, there is no chance for Ukraine to put ourselves in a better position. The hope to convince the West that we will make them believe that Russia is the mortal enemy of the West just breaks apart at the belief of the West that Russia is needed for them in their bigger confrontation with China, and that they can acquire Russian neutrality and procure it in a certain fashion of trading one things for another. So that's why we cannot believe the statement that we will win in this war, that we'll destroy Russia. All these videos and propaganda movies and all that stuff you see on Ukrainian TV, that everything will change, that the West will understand one day and that will help us to destroy Russia. No, it won't. That position is already in the body and flesh of Western strategy. You can type grand strategy in the Wikipedia and you can see separate British big strategy, American big strategy, just even on the very banal level of Wikipedia. You'll understand what the West is playing on, and you'll understand that there are no chances for Ukraine to fully defeat Russia militarily. The only chance Ukraine may have in this regard is if Russia would make some stupidity and would attack the West for some weird reason, which Russia 100% will not do. It's much more profitable for them to trade their current status for independence, trade with China, trade with India, trade with the West for their influence. And they're using this position. They're in the multi-vector phase, which at some point we were occupying too. This phase will pass eventually when they strike the agreements, but for now they are right there in the middle of it. And they were forced to get in this position when the West started limiting their access to the world resources and to continuing being a mineral superpower. So now they have to remodel their society, their production, and everything, and their contracts. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we do not have a chance for destroying Russia militarily, only if Russia goes mad and decides to attack the West. All right, Alexey, so I do want to bring an example here that we have discussed some time before. It's Blinken's visit to Kiev. And before this visit, there were some conversations and messages that the West is ready to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles on Russian troops. And it was published by a journalist of American publication Axios in Twitter, and currently known as X, that according to the words of the representative of a committee of the Foreign Affairs, Michael McCall, Blinken is going to announce that they would allow Ukraine, together with Britain, to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russia. So they were going to Ukraine to make this statement. This data leaked in the media. Putin came out and a bunch of Russian authorities came out and said that verbatim, giving such an permission would be equal to NATO declaring a war on Russia, and Russia will start fighting a war against the West. And yet, even under these conditions, they demonstrated some steps forward and returned some of the prisoners of war, including Azov fighters. It was the first in a very long time. So it appears that this is a fork of different variants played by the West. And we can do this, we can do that, you have some time to think. And they are making these decisions. Russia is following the West's lead and demonstrating that they can return the prisoners, and they are eager to go and discuss. Right, Nikolai, the war is going on, right? So the trade still happens in the backdrop of the active war fighting. And there's still that communication that NATO is giving to Ukraine will disavow you of any support, and you'll have to figure it out yourself. Or to Russia, they're sending a message, we will increase funding and support of Ukraine. Let me remind something here to our listeners, the instruments of propaganda. First is selective factors. Selective facts are highlighted, the others are not being displayed. Second, removing context. When context that we try to bring in here in the stream, propaganda tries to disappear it. They create new context. For example, we all as one are against the empire of evil, we and the West. And the third, opinions are being presented as facts. Bright opinions, bright individuals, we need to destroy Russia, we need to go to Vladivostok, we will never come to peace as long as they have a bit of our land. And this is presented as facts when it is not. Understandably, the trade is happening in the backdrop of all that, as I mentioned. And I want to remind those who think that it is not happening, an interesting statement by Putin made about a month ago, when he publicly asked Iran to not be too stern in answering Israel for the death of Khania, the one that was liquidated by Israel. So they're trading for everything, not only Ukraine, Middle East, Africa, Latin America. This is the global restructuring of the contours of the New World. And if you think that our statements and Telegram channels can affect that global game, you are quite mistaken. That's why the West is highlighting the red lines for Russia. Don't go there, otherwise it'll hurt you a lot. And Russia did start this war. They are the guilty party, and of course they're being communicated from positions of force but still, there is a communication. There is a trade happening, even from the position of force with Russia, that completely topples the picture of Ukrainian propaganda that talks about the global fight of the best in humanity against the dark regimes. It is not so. Russia knows about that, and they never stopped trading for a day with the West. I can only repeat once again that Russia is not interested in fighting a war with the West. It is more profitable for them to continue trading, and that's what they're pursuing. And the sooner Ukraine gets on the rails of objective reality, the better it will be for our country. Ukraine has a very different task, not a grandiose victory over Russia, but first, to prevent the second round of this war. And even that is probably secondary. Primary would be to do something about the global strategy of Ukraine, because even if nobody would be attacking us, we are in a very difficult position when our demographics is not supporting our economy, is not supporting our future development. When you have 16 millions of non-working for 9 millions of working, this country is doomed. It is difficult. Even in peace times, when everybody loves you and brings you flowers and money, and nobody is shooting at you. When you don't need to remove 1 million men from economy to the battlefront. We already are facing severe issues, and we need a radical change of strategy in the country. Even if we get somebody like Lee Kuan Yew, there is no guarantee for survival of Ukraine. Over 30 years, Ukraine was brought, and by elites and by people as well, to a complete impotence for the future. And the war that Putin started basically worked as the deadly blow to Ukraine. And the politics continued to be pressed by Ukrainian elites and people who are responding to these politics, who are voting with their feet, leaving the country. This is basically coup de grace. This is the mortal wound for Ukraine. We're not even talking about restoring the industries and starting something new and production. We're talking about reanimation of a very deadly sick person. This is the real state of things in Ukraine. Does Ukraine deserve to be fought for? Absolutely. Do we need to stop the war? We do, including by force and some other measures. But we do need to, of course, put accents on industrialization, on making the country livable and attractive to people. But who will be doing it? How are we going to be doing it? And that's why all the people who are screaming that yes, we'll be fighting to the end, they're either working for propaganda or they're sincerely lost at the current big picture of the world, not seeing the full picture, not seeing the full disposition between us and the West and Europe. Because I also want to mention that all the Democrats were saying of Biden's administration, they continue saying that. Even the day before yesterday, he mentioned that I'm not even seeing Putin in the future. What did he say in Warsaw? What did he say in 21, before the first concentration of Russian troops on our border? That we, the free world, digital democracies, are opposing the damned regimes and we will never surrender. We will not let them win. And he was naming the number of 650 millions of military aid to Ukraine in the face of Russian military machine, which had official budget of 61 billion at that time. And then he says that he's quoting the words of John Paul II, dear to the hearts of all the Poles, and he's appealing to them, saying, I'm the Catholic and myself, etc. And he goes to Saudi Arabia, which America accused before in killing the journalist brutally and murdering and sanctioned them. And we're talking that they're theocracy, that they're evil regime. So then he goes there and signs the contract for $3 billion in arms. Ukrainians tend to believe the words because they really want to believe the words, because the situation is really hopeless otherwise. If you really acknowledge that you're one-on-one with against the horrible enemy, who is also being negotiated with above our heads by our supposed allies about the future and how things will be divided, then everything crumbles. But this is what we need to acknowledge. We need to break that propaganda reality and see reality as is, because then we get a chance to play counter to our foes. We have a chance to actually win, or at least not lose in this game. As long as we do not see that, we will be played, because the rule is simple. The one who has more illusions is going to be played by the other who has maybe half an inch less of illusions. And we voluntarily put our heads in the bucket of illusions. There's no war between the West and Russia, despite of all statements by Russian propaganda and Western speeches that they're against dictators. There is a very complex geopolitical trade happening, sometimes by force, sometimes by diplomacy. This is us fighting near Pokrovsk, and they're trading over our heads. This is the reality. And the only right that we would have in this reality, the only strength that we would have, if we figured a way to provide ourselves with military components or supplies and logistics for at least 40 or 50%. But for 33 years and for the last 2.5 years, we've been doing actions in the opposite direction. And it's not only about powers, it's about the society as well. Let's damn all the Ukrainians who moved to Europe. Okay, you damn them. What are you going to fill your demographic situation with? These ones are not coming back. You happy now? Well, listen, Alexey, I want to clarify about the words of Andrei Beletsky that there is no military catastrophe on the front yet. We are getting different messages from the station near Pokrovsk. I'm not even saying that it's only about Pokrovsk. It's a rather big square of events there, and there are a lot of concerning news coming from there. And we're also getting additional notes from Kupiansk direction that Russia is activating some troops there. Do you think there are some basis to think that military catastrophe can actually happen there? Is it so? All right, first about military catastrophe. We don't know what is he using as measure. What is his measure for the catastrophe? Because this is a quote, we don't see the context. Perhaps he means a total destruction of Ukraine and Russia occupying the whole territory till Lviv, or even the right bank, right? Left bank. So, don't know exactly what he was saying, but fundamentally, we have not made the right decisions so far. About a year ago, we refused to make decisions that could be saving Ukraine and Ukrainian armed forces. And for now, the front is slowly crumbling, but situation may evolve in such a way that the West may shrink their aid, and facing the perspectives of no support or very little support in 25, the front may collapse. We, right now, holding the front line mostly by FPVs, mostly by drones. We don't have enough infantry. If the enemy finds our infantry position, they usually destroy our position in about 24 hours by artillery, by FPV, whatever. They just find ways to destroy them. And given the situation, knowing that Ukraine troops are in a deep defense, Russians using all kinds of tactics to send even one or two fighters guided by radio and their drones. They guide them to a position behind our troops, the ones that undermine our logistics, and they guide individuals, one, two, again another one. By the end of the day, they may have already a platoon there that is problematizing the position of our outpost or the front line. And combined with waves of artillery and aerial bombs, this is a very successful tactic. And today, Zvetnevich, the head of the recruitment commission, mentioned that only in about 3 months we will see the result of current mobilization effort in Ukraine. That implies that for the next 3 months we will still be suffering from a deficit of troops on the front. And what if Russia by that time announces mobilization? So we are fighting now in a disadvantage. We have less infantry in a fire contact with the enemy. And now imagine the weather goes down in autumn. Very soon there'll be a situation when Mavics and other drones will not have good eyes to chase and track the enemy's movements. And then you need more infantry on the front. Infantry that will be counterattacking, taking positions, attacking themselves and disrupting the enemy's attempts. And you want the secondary position behind the front line that would allow to cull these attempts of the enemy to seep through. Do we have these infantry units? We don't. And to train them, we need to train them in a different fashion, not how we do it now, because quality does matter for that. I can make from a recruit in about 3 weeks a relatively good infantryman. But the way they're being trained in our training facilities, they would not make a good infantry from 3 months. I'm not even talking about a single unit, I'm talking about platoons and companies so they can work together. And moreover, since 1870s, actually probably since 1810s, even before Napoleon slightly, the wars are being won by different and very versatile units that have different trainings, divisions, armies, army corps, that have different ingredients there. We don't have that. We're trying to break this wall by all means, but we're still making a lot of mistakes and definitely not doing enough. With Syrskyi ascension, we have a cadre catastrophe in the military. People who had some credit from their experience, people who could have achieved certain things and could add additional expertise to decisions, they're being pushed out when they voice their opinions different from his. And then they appoint new people who do not perform well. And continuous replacement of leadership doesn't give additional confidence to the battalions and brigades on the front. That method is not fulfilling what they were hoping it would fulfill. Most of our commanding out centers on the front, they are in a regime of loss of operative control. So if the position is lost, they're sending a message to the troops on the front, we need to recapture it. And if the troops on the front fail to do that, they send a commission. So they don't really know problems, they don't know the situation. They just send directives and they send commissions when their directives don't work. And they self-abstain from even attempting to understand the real situation. This is overall in the army. Of course, there are some parts of the front. I know a couple of control posts, command posts, where the situation is controlled professionally and well. But 2 for 1,000 kilometers of the front, that's way too little. So if the situation in military forces in our army will not be drastically changed very soon, we will start experiencing that military defeat. The front will start crumbling. That's why somewhere in the ideal world where we turned into Singapore, Israel, we got our act together and started doing something smart, or at least effective enough that Russian generals are doing, then we do have a chance to not only resist Russia, but also to bring back some of the territories. But since we're not doing it, we're not observing that we're doing it, then perhaps signing a peace accord is our only historic chance in the near historic perspective. And 2 ministers of foreign affairs were here recently, together for the first time, explaining to us exactly that. So we're given a chance to do something about demography, something about economy, something about armed forces, perhaps change the generation, change the type of organization, change how we react things, and then perhaps something new will happen with our country. Even some random music turned on, I guess, to create additional epic moment for this message. Just a second. Yeah, that was all of a sudden. A small creative pause, probably for a second, and Alexey will be back. Oh, there he is. Once again, I'll remind that we are supporting fundraisers for different brigades on the front. Under this stream, we have support for 110th Brigade. I think they were in Avdiivka. Yeah, they were in a very difficult position there. They performed excellently there. After Avdiivka was captured, there was a very difficult situation for them. But I have some friends fighting there, and they're still successful in performing their duties. We're helping them for, I think, third or fourth time, and they're asking for more funds for new drones. And they are still fighting in one of the most difficult directions of our front. All right. Perhaps it makes sense to discuss China's position, because there is a potential meeting of Xi Jinping and Zelensky in October. Charlie has mentioned that meeting, not sure what status is he in right now, and whether that event is going to happen. Do you think it's really going to occur? Yeah, there were a lot of things around this message, and some officials started to denounce its probability. But since there is a big trade happening, and the trade is going on between the ministers of foreign affairs, visiting Ukraine, visiting Russia, so if we say that, let's not call it a peace agreement, let's say an exit from this complex situation, then of course this meeting can occur. It was also announced that Zelensky will be participating and making a statement on the 75th anniversarial session of United Nations. That'll be soon as well, so perhaps there'll be more meetings there. Don't follow the words, follow the deeds, follow the hands. All right, and with this, Zelensky also criticized Chinese-Brazilian peace plan. He said that it was basically written by Russia or something like that. In your opinion, do you think he should have been so harsh about this plan? He's solving a very complex task. He needs to explain inside Ukraine where the 2.5 years, and after the war we'll name how many lives have gone, and what for did our economy and the country suffer if peace agreement will be on the front line, so there'll be no borders of 91, or if, for example, Russia would present some flexibility, since they do look and operate in a longer time frame and in a longer geographic span, in a wider span from Latin America to Alaska. Of course, they can probably secede some territories they occupied, but they definitely want Lugansk, Donetsk regions, and Crimea. And they just have a longer strategy. What is a strategy, by the way? What does it give you? It gives you a longer view, an obstacle that can be insurmountable otherwise on a tactical level. On a strategic level, you may see exits around it. You may see other ways to win. And those who have longer strategy have more flexibility, which in this case, Russia does. They also have centralized power that controls the country rather well. They have talented propaganda machine representatives, and they can explain to their people where they wasted 600-700 people dead and wounded. And for us, it'll be a big obstacle, big challenge for the government to explain why did we lose this war. And there was a lot of propaganda about us always winning, because we have a big chunk of our society still believing that the only way for us is to win. And they'll be astonished, and they'll be asking questions. Why did they lose all the friends? Why did we lose all the territory? So that Putin would get Donetsk and Lugansk completely? So now Zelensky and his government need to create certain motions to imprint in the minds of our population that they were fighting. They were continuously fighting and disagreeing with any peace accords, that they were basically deceived by allies and foes, and there was no other way but to sign the peace accord, but we wanted to fight. And this is the connection that is being sent now to the heads of Ukrainians. That's what Zelensky government is trying to imprint. Because suddenly tomorrow we'll be apparently discovering that the government and the army were single as one, and we were going to fight and we're going to win, but our partners prevented us from doing it. Oh, so it's like army speech and faith, like army language and faith. Yeah, that part 2, exactly. And then historians may dig deeper and figure out why and how did we come to the same slogan after the bloody war. Alexey, there is also another suggestion to analyze a plan B. Wall Street Journal made another publication that the West is pushing Ukraine to start thinking about plan B in war with Russia. Of course, they're painting a different plan, but we know that Ukraine can create its own scenario for plan Bs that dismantles and disrupts different agreements and potential trades arranged for by the West and Russia. So can we imagine that Ukraine, official Kiev, somehow in the depth of the night is figuring out a different plan, plan B, some actions that can disrupt the current situation and perhaps enter into the big history as a strong player in 2025? Although we do see in publications on the West that nobody is going to give us any money next year. Nobody is making the blunt statements about that yet. Nikolai, no, on Tokyo meeting, they already mentioned that. We are not believing these discussions and rumors coming from there, but apparently it is already being said. Well, we need to define our position. I think 25 is the year. If it turns out to be without peace agreement, there is no freezing on the front. Imagine the war is going on. What is happening then? Well, okay, so I don't know, if we invade, I don't know, Belarus, Crimea, Mars, whatever, it will all be over with the situation if the West diminishes the level of aid to Ukraine. Even current aid is not enough. But with the level of economy we have, with the level of supplies we have, we will crumble after doing another provocation, as they call them in Moscow. Perhaps we can do one more that we would not have told about to our allies, and as we call it, the brilliant Svetoslav-style incursion. But this war, unfortunately, cannot be solved by one-time captures or one-time single operations. This war can be won by a conveyor, by a long-term perspective, and the right capability to organize your resources and supplies. And the situation on the front. The situation on the front could be better for us, and now we're being explained that even aid to us is not going to be as big as we had before. $61 billion we will never see again, and even that $61 billion that was designated for Ukraine was completely inadequate for us to solve the tasks that were officially announced in the country. And now we're facing the perspective of that aid dwindling, fundamentally dwindling. After that, you can do a lot of brave operations and disrupt the negotiations. It will be, however, over very soon when you run out of bullets. Well, we have Polish Minister Radosław Sikorski, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said that Poland will find some money for Czech initiative to purchase more shells for armed forces of Ukraine. Of course, they will find. The West actually will increase their production slower than they wanted to, but still, this increase is not enough. Plus, not everything is being sent to Ukraine. The West is building their red lines. They explained Putin that Dnieper is untouchable territory. The conversation will be different if Putin goes beyond Dnieper. Second, they're showing that any attempt to fight directly against NATO will end in disaster for Putin and Russia. They are good at explaining that. The aid will be different coming to Ukraine with different goals and targets, etc. And Russia knows that, and they don't need it. With full inadequacy in Moscow and St. Petersburg military districts, they understand that they cannot threaten the West. So Putin is presenting rather much flexibility, showing that he's ready to discuss, to either trade for more or buy him some time to prepare for the second round. Just remember the simple formula, double ultimatum. Russia is being presented with a double ultimatum. You guys, if you will insist, there'll be different sanctions and there'll be more aid to Ukraine. You have to sit down and negotiate. And Ukraine is being explained that if you do not sit down and negotiate, which is important for us, for the West, for Ukraine to play with Russia, to sign documents and to present somewhat managed force against China conflict in the future. So they're telling us that if we don't do that, we will not get enough support. Don't follow the words, follow the deeds. Russia still has parity on the long-range military means, missiles and bombs, and we're just being fed promises. Daily we lose women, children and soldiers due to their long-range arms, but nothing is being allowed or given to Ukraine to parry that. So watch what is being done. Do not listen to words. Yeah, you can run around, you can break the negotiations, you can disrupt some of the plans. You can attack Putin's yacht or do some other diversions, but you would not get more aid as a result, or maybe the aid will even dwindle. A couple more words here. There was a phrase by Sikorsky. Hang on, one more second, Nikolai. Why support still, however, be going? Russia needs to acknowledge that they will not be allowed to win in Ukraine. They need to acknowledge that they will not be allowed to cross Dnieper under no circumstance, and that they will not, or should not, and will never fight with NATO. For that, Ukraine needs to be supported still, and giving Ukraine new opportunities. And when that appeared on the radar, that's why Russia came out, Putin came out and started talking about the war with NATO and using nukes, because the perspective is very painful for Russia. They understand they'll lose the main advantage, their aerial means. Just that may lead the war in a different direction. That's why Andrei Beletsky and some others who are concerned about it, that's why they're so upset with the West, because in order to change situation on the front, if you change situation in air, you will change situation on the front. It's a simple step, but the West is holding this card because they want to exert pressure. Russia understands that if Ukraine gets enough permission to shoot 300, even 400 kilometers in the depth of Russia, because 70% of the airfields they're using against us will be in the range that we can reach. So they are very concerned with this. And if they give us something that flies to 900 kilometers, that'll be the end of it for a Russian war. Then if they will not completely lose the campaign, they'll have to withdraw from certain territories in Ukraine and lose their parity. And that's a dead end for Russia without chances. The West still holds these cards, however. They will maintain a certain level of battle readiness for Ukraine, but again, it is down-regulated by the ultimatum. The moment we misbehave, that's when the thing goes down, even maybe to the critical. If we listen, if we behave, we get a little more. If Russia is misbehaving, then they've been threatened. If Russia is less talkative, then, again, Ukraine is being supported better. And that's how the whole situation is driven. It's just naive Ukrainian citizens are still hoping that the West will understand something and the situation will change drastically just because they don't understand something. They do. End of the first hour.